There shall be signs. My name is Daniel Vallis, and welcome to our channel. Here is a fig report from Israel. The Bender's fig tree has a lot more figs turning purple on it, but there's still a number of green figs. More are turning purple and becoming ripe as it gets closer to that fig season, but there's still a number of green figs right now, but more are turning purple. And in our last video, we talked about how the Benders harvested a number of their grapes on August 13th, but they did not harvest them all. There's still quite a number that they still have on their vine. This is some pictures that they sent in today on the 17th. There's still quite a bit that weren't ripe and weren't ready yet. And this is what we talked about before. The grape harvest extends over a period of time. And there's still a number of grapes that they still have on their vine even after their harvesting, after they started the harvesting. Some that are still ripening and will be harvested later. They are close, but they'll be harvested in a little bit. And there's just some that are still taking their time. And you remember from our field trip over at the Golden Heights Winery when we went through their vineyard, they talked about how the harvesting process, even once they start harvesting the grapes, it's still spread over a period of time, depending on the grapes and the different conditions of the grapes that they want them to be, depending on how they're going to use them. And I decided to check out the Golden Wines Facebook and Instagram, and they mentioned on there that they started their harvest on August 8th. There's that machine they were talking about in the field trip, but they started their harvest on August 8th, which is just right around the 15th of Av. But then they've also been talking about yesterday, they posted how they're still harvesting, and they're doing more of the specialized hand harvesting, and there was a difference between the two. And when we went on the tour back on July 14th, they talked about how the harvest would be extended over a period of time. So here we are in the month of Av, which is the second month of the grape harvest, but she was also talking about how it would go for 2 to 3 months. It would extend into the next month, which is typically known for the harvesting of figs and the processing and drying of figs too. But like we talked about, these months are generalized. This month of Av is the second month with the grape harvest, even though it will extend beyond that. So the grape harvest is going to go on for a while, and if you look here, they started their harvest on the 8th of August, which was right at the 15th of Av, which is traditionally marks the start of the grape harvest. That's when they announced that they started their harvest, and then a number of days later, on the 16th, they're still harvesting, doing more of the specialized harvest, and like she talked about, it could go for quite a bit more time. The harvest is stretched out over time, so we're in the time of grape harvest now, of the tender grapes. They are very tender, very delicate, easily bruised. And that's a classification of fruits even today. Tender fruits is a category of fruits such as grapes, peaches, plums, nectarines, certain things that are easily bruised. Those are called tender fruits because they're tender. And right now we're at a time of tender grapes, and they are being harvested. We're also at a time of the green figs, but they are turning. And we are approaching the month that's generally associated with the fig harvest. We're at a time when we've seen so much that has led us to this point with the wise men parallels, so many signs that we've seen in the sun, moon, and stars. We're also at a time in just a few days on August 21st when there's going to be another sign, the total solar eclipse right near Regulus, which is a star. And it should catch our attention. This is a reminder that combines all of them. We're seeing signs in the sun, moon, and stars. And particularly in just a few days, we're going to see a sign that involves all of them. We're at a time when we have been looking up, and we are looking up presently, and we're also looking forward into the future of the celestial signs that we know are going to happen. Luke 21:25, and there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Now this is a parallel passage to Matthew 24, where Jesus was talking about these same things, and here he's giving a very concise nutshell overview of the events that the disciples asked him about. But notice there is a certain sequence, and it matches the other sequences that he talked about before in Matthew, and also the sequences in Revelation. Let's expand it a bit just so you can see the different phases that he's describing here. He says there's going to be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars. Semicolon. So this is a first phase. There is going to be a period of signs that the world sees prior to the tribulation event starting. And this should catch our attention because the last 2 years with the wise men parallels, we've seen major rare signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars too, with the wise men parallels. This needs to catch our attention that Jesus said there will be signs on the celestial clock that you will see. And they're going to come before these other things. And after that period of signs in the sun and in the moon and the stars, there's going to come a time on the earth when all the nations are filled with distress and perplexity. Things are going to be happening that are bizarre, that they cannot understand and they cannot explain. That's going to be happening in a phase after the period of the signs. But also during that time of perplexity, there will be events seen in the heavens with the sun and moon and stars. Those are described by Jesus in Matthew and even in Revelation. So those signs and those events are going to continue during that time, but they're also going to be seen before that. And during that time of perplexity, the sea and the waves are going to be roaring. It's going to be distinct. The world will recognize when these are going on. And when you read the events that happen while these other things are going on, you read about the great earthquake, and so you know there's going to be massive tsunamis around the world that are going on, the sea and the waves roaring. And men's hearts will be failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, things that they cannot explain, things that are out of the normal, things that are bizarre. Why? For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. The signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, those are leading up to even greater events that the world is going to see. And during that time of distress, and during that time of perplexity, during that time of those major earth-shaking events, even the heavens are going to be shaken and affected. But it needs to catch our attention. He starts out by saying there will be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars. This is going to be the beginning of these events. It's going to go into those events, but by themselves, at first when it begins, there will be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, which will continue and lead right into a time when even the powers of heavens themselves shall be shaken. Which reminds us, of course, what he warned about in Matthew 24, about how the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then this is repeated by John in Revelation 12 about the stars of heaven being cast to the earth during that time as well, before the sign of the Son of Man. And this information was sent to the 7 churches for their foreknowledge, so they would know what to look for, so they would know what signs they would see coming together. And also know that there is a time of travail, there is a time of sun destruction associated with certain timing that is known when you do look up into the heavens and you see these prescribed signs that are going to be seen in the sun, moon, and stars. Christ tells us where the signs will take place in the heavens. He even tells us what will be involved with those signs, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Not abnormal, bizarre events. The signs are going to be seen on his celestial clock. And like he mentions in the Matthew 24 passage, after the sign of the Son of Man, that's going to lead to events when the Son of Man, who the sign is about, when he comes in a cloud with power and great glory to set up his kingdom at the end of the tribulation, which was the answer to their question when he was coming to set up his kingdom. But verse 28, he's just finished describing a sequence, and he says, when these things that he just talked about begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. And he spake to them a parable. Behold the fig tree and all the trees. When they now shoot forth, ye see and know of your own selves that summer is now nigh at hand. So likewise ye, when ye see these things come to pass, know ye that the kingdom of God is nigh at hand. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled. This generation he was talking about. Okay, several things need to catch our attention. He emphasized right before this that there will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. And then that's going to lead into other events that will culminate eventually in the sign of the Son of Man, and then the return of Christ at the end of the tribulation to set up his kingdom. But he emphasizes to his disciples, I want you to be looking for me when these things begin to come to pass. He says when you start seeing these signs in the sun, moon, and stars, you are at the beginning. And particularly when you know you're in the last generation. He's emphasizing when you see those signs happening, that's starting. Those same signs are going to be continuing and culminating in the sign of the Son of Man. They're not going to stop. They're not going to pause for a while and then start up again. Once they start, that is the beginning. And when you see these things begin to come to pass, then that is when you need to look up. Start looking up, lift up your heads, start studying what you are seeing. For your redemption draweth nigh. And repeatedly emphasized, he's coming for his wise servants before the tribulation events start, during the days of Noah and Lot, before judgment comes. He's coming to pick them up. He's making his appearing. And that's what we're looking for, his appearing. He's coming later. But when we see the signs in the sun, moon, and stars start, that is when we look up, and that's when we know our redemption draweth nigh. When we see those signs on the celestial clock. And notice how he segues right into another picture, another sign. And he spake unto them a parable. Behold the fig tree and all the trees. When they now shoot forth, ye see and know of your own selves that summer is now nigh at hand. This is very important. He's giving them a picture of a reliable sign that tells reliable time. And this is how God works with his signs. He does not use random events. He does not even use random events in the heavens. He uses predictable, reliable, confirmable events on the celestial clock and in other signs too as well, because they are reliable. And he says, when you see a fig tree shoot forth, you can reliably know that summer is now nigh at hand. You know the time because you are looking at a reliable clock, a reliable sign. In that particular parable, a fig tree when it blooms. Notice he's using this in comparison with the other signs he just mentioned. God uses signs that are reliable, signs that we can see and know of our own selves. He does not use random events. He uses predictable, confirmable celestial events on his clock so we can know of our own selves the time, the prophetic time. And that's why he uses this parable of a reliable sign, because that's the celestial signs in the sun, moon, and stars. They will be reliable. An unreliable sign just generates doubt. It does not generate faith, because it's not reliable. It's not confirmable. Our faith is in the reliability of God's celestial clock to work in predictable manners. And that automatically removes doubt, because we know it removes the questions of whether it will happen again. We can know it won't happen again. And this is why I tell people, with this Revelation 12 sign, there is no plan B. We can look at the signs on God's clock. We can see and know of our own selves that it is nigh at hand. And because we know the way God works with his creation and his celestial clock, that automatically excludes other random possibilities. He does not use those. Multiple times, Jesus even referenced predictable signs. For example, here he's talking about the fig trees. That means summer is nigh. He also talked about how you can look at the sky in the morning and that tells you the weather later on in the day. It tells you reliably. That's why you can act on those different signs you see. Signs must be reliable. Signs must be confirmable. And so when Christ tells us that there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, we know they're going to be in the reliable motions of the celestial clock. Not random motions, reliable motions. Verse 31, So likewise ye, when ye see these things come to pass, know. You can be assured, because it's confirmable, it's reliable. Know ye that the kingdom of God is nigh at hand. You will know the time when you look at the signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. When you see the things come to pass that Jesus explicitly stated would happen, then you can know authoritatively, reliably, that the kingdom of God is nigh at hand. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled. And this is something we always got to keep in mind when we look at the signs, particularly the ones that are detailed out for us. It's so we can see, so we can look at them, so we can look up at them, lift up our heads, examine them, study them, and then know of our own selves, because we know the reliability of the celestial clock, we can know what prophetic time it is, and we can bank on it. God's celestial clock is trusted because of its reliability. You don't trust a broken random clock. No, that just generates more doubt and questions. We can rely on God's clock because it is reliable. It is predictable. God gives us so many things to watch for, specific things so we can see and so we can know what time it is. And we detail a number of these in the When to Watch booklet. where he tells us he's coming during the days of Noah and Lot, and he tells us he's coming in the last generation. He tells us things so we can see these things happening, and then so we can know where we are, what time it is, and also see other things on the future, and then also know about those events. We can know assuredly that those are the events because they are happening on the celestial clock, and the way God works, they will not be happening at other times. So that hedges in our understanding of what we see on the horizon, what we see where we are now, and what we have seen in the sun, moon, and stars in the past. We can see these things and know. And it needs to catch our attention when we study what has the world seen in the past 3.5 years. We've seen the 4 blood moons. That's caught many of the world's attention, but then they stopped after that. There was a total solar eclipse at the North Pole, a sign for the whole world, if you want to take it that way. And then that just started the wise men parallels after that. We've seen signs in the sun, the moon, and stars. We've seen this list. We've seen this sequence of events that Christ described would start. We've seen it begin to come to pass just within the past few months and years. We've seen it culminating. We've seen it increasing. And we see another sign in the near future that involves the sun, the moon, and stars again, very prominently, right in this whole sequence of other signs that we have seen. The total solar eclipse that happened back in 2015, that happened in Pisces, the fish, a beautiful picture of the redeemed. And it should catch our attention that the next total solar eclipse, which happened in 2016, right at the time of Jupiter opposition, happened right near Pisces, but between it and Aquarius, the water bearer, the one who brings the living water. And then this next one that's coming up in just a few days is happening at Regulus, right by the heart of the lion, which reminds us of the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the one who came to redeem the fish. Shiloh is the one who came to be the Redeemer, to be the mediator. Powerful reminders punctuating all these other signs that we have seen. We've seen between these major bookends, we've seen the wise men parallels, which also remind us about Shiloh, which remind us about the Messiah, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, reminding us the King is coming. And we know that he came to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time. And so it needs to catch our attention when we see these signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, which have a distinct message about our Redeemer, Shiloh, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, reminding us that he is nigh at the doors. We can look up, we can see, we can know that he is nigh. We have so many reminders that he is coming. Our Redeemer is the one who said you will see these signs in the reliable movements of the sun, in the reliable movements of the moon, and you will see these signs in the stars. And we can look back on the past 2 years, we can even look back on the past 3.5 years and say we have seen, we have looked up, we have lifted up our heads, and we have seen these signs start, and they've actually been increasing in their meaning. And here in just a few days we see another important celestial sign that involves the sun, the moon, and the stars. When a total solar eclipse happens and darkens out the sun, you can see very prominent stars right in that area during the day. So a major celestial event is about to happen that has not happened in a while, and it involves all 3 things specifically that Christ said the signs would be seen in. This needs to catch our attention. We can't say anything's going to happen on that day, but we can say it is a sign because we are told to look for it, expect it, and when we see it, we will know that our redemption draweth nigh. We've looked up, we've seen the story of our Redeemer, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. We know we're at a time that's even bringing attention now again with this total solar eclipse coming up, bringing attention to the one that the past 2 years, those signs in the sun, moon, and stars, which were talking all about him, we now have a seemingly cumulative sign that is pointing square back at it again. Has this caught our attention? He said, look up, lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. What has the signs over the past 2 years been all about? They've been all about our Redeemer. We can see them. We can know that our redemption draweth nigh. And again, it should catch our attention that he couples this idea of the signs in the sun, moon, and stars with the last generation. He told us 2,000 years ago, these particular signs will be seen within the last generation. And that's going to be a double confirmation that you are seeing the right signs. If they aren't happening in the last generation, then you know you're not seeing the signs I want you to be looking at. But if you see them uniquely occurring within the last generation, you know those are the signs I want you to be paying attention to. And they will have the meaning that your redemption draweth nigh, if they happen within that context. Because that context, that generation will see all the other prophetic events, which include the heavens being shaken, the stars falling, and the Son of Man even returning. There will be many from that generation that see the culmination of all these prophetic events that Jesus just talked about. So we know the time frame, we know the context, and we can look at the last generation, get an idea of that they're in their 70s now. They're not too far away from 80 either. And we can look on the celestial clock. We can look up. We can lift up our heads. We can see, and we've seen the sign of the Son of Man starting to occur, and we've been watching it over the past few months. As it's progressed, it's happening in the sky right now. And with just a little bit of research of how Jupiter works and all the different celestial actors involved with Leo, the Lion, and Virgo, it doesn't take too long to figure out that this is not happening any other time. This is only happening one single time in this generation. So we can see these signs, and we can know of our own selves that this is a sign, because the signs are on his celestial clock. They work in a reliable manner. They can be authenticated. They can be confirmed. They are reliable, which means we can know that it is a sign because we know there aren't other random events, because that's not how God works. We know because we know how the clock works. The reliability is part of the authentication. And we can see on the horizon another specific celestial sign that Jesus talked about in Matthew and then further described in the book of Revelation. We can see this on the horizon. We can see it even going on right now, so we do know it is going on right now. We can see it and know, particularly because it's in context of this last generation, we can see it going on and we can know this is the sign. There is no plan B. Because of the way the celestial clock works, God works with reliable signs, just like the fig tree, just like seeing the weather in the morning, just like the sun, the moon, and the stars. He uses reliable signs, and he tells us where to look. Look in the heavens. You will see the signs there, and likewise, just like these other signs work in a reliable manner, you can look up into heavens. You can see a reliable, confirmable sign. And that also tells you there are no other options. You will know that that is the sign. And we've been studying this a lot lately. We have a whole booklet on it. And it doesn't take too long to confirm it, because there's only one woman that's going to be clothed with the sun along the ecliptic, and that's Virgo. She's long been known as a virgin. So when she does become pregnant, it does catch our attention. And as we've been observing with Jupiter's movements, this is the only time that pregnancy cycle is going to be accurately portrayed within the Virgin, particularly within this last generation. So that greatly narrows down the options. There's only one time this is going to happen. And then you just figure out when it's going to be clothed in the sun, which is in the September time. And then you just find when the moon's also going to be under her feet during that time. And then you can just do a little bit of reading to find out that that same woman, Virgo, does have a crown of stars above her head. And one of the subs had some questions about exactly what that crown of the 12 stars was. And so just to share it with others who may have the similar question, we've talked about Ertes's book, The Phenomena. And we talk about that more in our Revelation 12 booklet. But this was a very popular piece of literature at the time when John wrote the book of Revelation. Most of the Roman world knew it, and even Paul quoted it on Mars Hill. This was just as popular as Homer's Iliad. And so when we read things in here, that tells us what the world's understanding at the time the book of Revelation was given. That tells us what they understood Virgo to have. And so when we look down around line 90, it's talking about Virgo, the Virgin. And then we read just a little bit further down, around line 145, and it's talking about how many less brilliant stars, by name unknown, spangle her vestments and her forehead crown. And so 2,000 years ago, even over 2,000 years ago, Virgo was long known to have a starry crown on her forehead. And so when Revelation 12 talks about she has a crown on her head, Virgo indeed does have a starry crown on her head, and this was well known. But take note that it does mention many less brilliant stars. There are a number of stars that make up that crown, but they're harder to see. There are many of them, but they're harder to see. And so if we just look on Stellarium real quick, you'll remember Zavijava, the rear foot of the lion. Up here's Denebola, the tail of the lion. And so Virgo's head is generally around in this area, because right here is the hind leg of the lion, one of them. And then if you go with the Chaldean understanding of Zavijava as a rear foot, that also extends up in there somewhere too. So her head is around here, and you'll see many depictions where the lion is essentially almost sitting on top of her head. But you can see right here there's a number of stars that are less brilliant than some of the more prominent ones, such as Zavijava and Porrima and other ones that jump out to you more readily. There's a number of stars here that spangle her forehead, and depending on how you count them, which ones you count, which ones really stand out to you, there are 12 there. She does have 12 stars on her forehead. And they're particularly grouped that make a little spangle on her forehead, a little crown there. And I did a little bit of digging through some of my older pictures, and my camera does not do it justice. Your eyes will see it better, but here you can see Virgo's torso area, Zavijava right here, and you can tell just with this very fuzzy picture that there's a number of stars in that area. And here's Denebola, the triangle tail of the lion, and then the hind foot, and then also Zavijava over here. So in this area you could tell there's a number of stars there, but your eyes would see it better and other cameras can do it better justice. So just by the historical understanding, they knew Virgo does have 12 stars on her forehead crowning her. That was well known. But they also knew they are harder to see. And so when we jump forward to September 23rd, we can go with just a historical understanding. When Jupiter is finishing the pregnancy process, comes out on the other side of Spica around there, appropriate location along the length of Virgo to be representing a birth. The moon is going to be under her feet. She's clothed with the sun, and she has a crown of 12 stars on her forehead. And even though they are less brilliant, they are still there and known to be there. So it needs to catch our attention, though, that the lion is practically sitting on top of her head, which makes up 9 stars. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and Regulus would be the 9th. Those are the ones that most jump out to you when you go outside and look at it. Those are the brightest ones, and you'll typically see that sickle shape. You recognize that, so you easily count those. And then you'll typically see the triangle shape, which is a tail. The leg are harder to see, but you'll see the 9 real easily. Those will pop out to you. And so that's why 9 are commonly associated with the stick figures of Leo, because those are the ones you prominently see. So it should catch your attention that on the same date, 3 planets, which are also known as stars, are also there, shining bright. So you take 9 with Leo, 10, 11, 12. So even though she does have a crown of 12 stars already on her head, it needs to catch our attention that on this rare, unique day, which only happens one time, she's also having a very prominent crown of 12 stars that also stand out in addition to what she does have. So doubly making sure you understand this woman does have a crown of 12 stars. And again, when you look on so many celestial charts, they always show Virgo's head basically touching the hind leg of Leo. Leo is essentially sitting on top of her head. So this is another reason why you can count the stars of Leo, because he's sitting on her head. And particularly when the other planets are there too, counted in that collection, what would be seen visually would appear there to observation and to knowledge. So she has 12 above her head, very faint though, but she'll also have 12 very prominent ones on top of that are gravy on top of that. So double confirmation of that. So again, looking back on September 23rd, you have the crown of 12 stars that she'll have there, but then another rare crown placed upon her head too. So either way you take it, she has a crown of 12 stars. And you could even say she has 2 crown of 12 stars. One that is more faint and one that is more noticeable and obvious just because of its rarity and also its magnitude. And it needs to catch our attention that this was the understanding by the 7 churches in the Roman Greek world, where Ertis phenomena was very popular in the world at that time. This was their understanding. They fully understood what the Revelation 12 sign was talking about, with Draco, the fiery dragon, with Virgo, the virgin, the one who has the crown on her head. They understood this sign completely. This specific information was given to the churches so that they can see and so they can know. And they did know what John was talking about, even though they didn't see it in their time. They did know it. And it should catch our attention that almost 200 years before John wrote the book of Revelation was the Antikythera device. And we've talked about this before, and here's a modern replica of it. 200 years before this letter was even written, they knew how to predict the planet's motions on the celestial clock. And we've talked about the Babylonians knew how to do that, especially with Jupiter as well. They had foreknowledge of how the celestial heavens work. And there's a number of websites out there that talk about the device and all the different planetary things that it did for helping calculate almanacs and understand the planetary positions. When John sent the churches the book of Revelation with the specific information in it, there's no doubt in my mind that there were some individuals who had a pretty good idea, or had at least the knowledge of how to calculate possibly a window of when this would take place. Because you just have to figure out the cycles of when Virgo is going to be pregnant with Jupiter, and that alone will shave off hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years just by that. You can skip hundreds of years just by that with your calculations. They had the understanding of how Jupiter worked, particularly to quickly figure out at least a very good ballpark of when this would happen, even at their time. They also knew what John was talking about with Draco and the tail drawing the third part of the stars of heaven. And unfortunately, we're far removed from that historical understanding and just the everyday understanding that they had. And so we're on a rougher learning curve, but we have figured out that approximately that Draco tail time is around here somewhere. And we have narrowed it down and gotten a better idea of approximately it would happen when John could have seen it. And so we've been studying this, and we have a very close idea of it. And we've been putting ourselves into his shoes and trying to simulate what he saw and the details that he gave about it. We know that it does lead up to September 23rd. And so far, all we know is that it should be happening around here, and we really can't say that it hasn't already started. We're at a time when it was expected to start, and all he says is the tail is drawing, it's sweeping a third of the stars of heaven. So technically, you could even say it's doing that now, it started at, because he's describing a time frame. When, on the celestial clock, the dragon's tail sweeps a third of the stars of heaven. And so we've gotten a pretty good ballpark idea of that, and it also appears that it possibly has started this time frame that he's talking about when the other events, particularly the next events, will be happening within this time frame. We know we're at an expected time of phase A, when his tail draws a third part of the stars of heaven. We appear to be at or in that time frame, and we're also told that the next event that's coming after that, before the birth though, is when the stars are cast to the earth. And so we can see this sign transpiring, and we can have a very good idea of seeing what John saw of this time frame, and then we can know when to expect the rest of the events to happen in. And so this is what we've been looking at. We've been seeing the signs in the sun, the moon, and stars. We also see the very specific sign he's described about the sign of the Son of Man. We see so many things telling us the time, things that we can see, things that we can know, things that are reliable, things that are predictable, things that are confirmable by history, by the celestial events, and by ourselves, just by going outside and looking at them. Now we're just a month away from the sign of the Son of Man, so the sun is getting closer and closer, which means that Jupiter and Spica and Virgo are setting closer to the horizon after sunset. So that does mean you are running out of time to go outside and look at it, but definitely go outside and look at it. See the reality of the signs that are going on right now, remembering what Jesus said. He said, when you see these things begin to come to pass, look up, lift up your heads. When we go outside and look at it, we can see the reality of it. We can see the authenticity of it. We can see the reliability of the heavens that God created. We can see and know. And this is why he wants us to look up. Because when we see, we will know. When we know, we will know the time, and we will know the time of expectation for him to appear. I got to go out last night and take a picture of Jupiter and Spica. It's been raining here a lot lately, making up for last year, I think. So I was finally able to take a picture, even though it's still a little bit hazy. But again, it's a reminder, it's a sign in the sun, the moon, and the stars that tells us the time. We can look up, we can lift up our heads, we can see, we can know what time it is. And because his celestial clock moves in reliable manners, we also know what is on the horizon. We know what time we are at because God's clock is reliable. We know the signs we have seen in the past that have led us here. The signs in the sun, the moon, and stars with total solar eclipses and the wise men's signs. So many things that we have seen that have brought us right to here. And we are at a place where we have a daily celestial reminder in the sky reminding us of the time where we are at right now and what's on the horizon and what's going to happen before the clock reaches that final conclusion on September 23rd. If you have not yet, go outside and look at it. If nothing else, to build your own faith, to look up, to see so you can know, to allow the Holy Spirit to impress upon you and remind you of what you have seen, what His Word says about these signs, the reliability of His celestial clock. We have been specifically told that these signs will happen. We have been specifically told to look at these signs. Friend, do you know why Jesus told us there would be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars? Because He wanted us to look at them. He wanted us to look up and lift up our heads, so we would see, and so we would know, and so we could go forward in faith, knowing that our redemption draweth nigh. I highly encourage you to download our booklet, The Revelation Chapter 12 Sign. Learn more about this celestial sign that involves the sun, the moon, and the stars, happening right on time on God's celestial clock. Also learn about the time of perplexity that He talked about, and how it deals with the clock. And also learn about why Revelation tells us Satan knows his time is short at the culmination of the sign of the Son of Man. You can find links for all these resources in the description box. Luke 21:34, just further down in the same chapter after he's talked about these signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. And take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this life, and so that day come upon you unawares. For as a snare shall it come on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. And he's talking about the perplexing events he just described. Watch ye therefore, and pray always, that ye may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. Christ had just finished emphasizing to His disciples there will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and I want you to look up, I want you to lift up your heads, I want you to see, I want you to know. I want you to pay attention to these signs that I am telling you about, because a snare is coming, and it will affect how you live if you are watching or if you are not watching. It will affect your fellowship with God. It will affect your prayer life. It will affect how you shine. It will affect the fruits that you bring forth in your life. Disciples, I've told you things to look for. I told you where they're going to be seen. Watch ye therefore. Christ is coming during the days of Noah and Lot. While life is still going on like normal, while none of the tribulation events have happened, and this is what He's emphasizing to His disciples. Watch ye therefore. You need to watch what I've told you to watch, where I've told you to watch. And when you see these things, pray always. You will need to be examining your walk and your fellowship with your Redeemer at that point. Casting off the works of darkness. Removing iniquity in your life and in your heart that is keeping your fellowship from where it should be. Keeping you from shining. Keeping you from bringing forth the fruits of the Spirit. But if you are watching and you know the time and you act on what you know and you act in the way that I want you to act, shining bright and bringing forth the fruits of the Spirit, drawing close to your Redeemer, you will be accounted worthy to escape all these things that I just told you about. The time of the tribulation is going to be abnormal. It's going to be full of bizarre events that do not happen regularly. That's why an escape is offered to the wise servants that watch and examine and give attention to their fellowship with their Redeemer, with their Master. And we need to be examining our standing right now. How are we as servants of our Lord? Are we making ourselves ready? Is He going to be proud of how we are living and how we are striving to serve Him? Are we making ourselves ready? Are we purifying ourselves even as He is pure? Definitely download the Be Ye Ready booklet, which has a number of guidelines and instructions and warnings that Christ gave His servants of what He wants to see in our life and what He wants to see in the churches. Christ wants us to be the wise servants, and like the wise men who saw the celestial signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, they saw and knew that it was time to act. And they allowed it to affect their lives, and they got a blessing that very few got. Because they acted on what they saw and what they knew. They went forward specifically to draw close to Shiloh, the Redeemer, the Messiah. What about us? We have heard so many trumpet calls, so many celestial signs in the sun, in the moon, in the stars, repeatedly, even paralleling what the wise men saw. So many celestial signs telling us our redemption draweth nigh. The bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. We have looked up, we have seen, we have heard, and we know that our redemption draweth nigh. So let us rise up, let us trim our lamps, let us shine bright, and let's go forward to meet our Redeemer, our beloved, our bridegroom, Jesus Christ. And let's serve Him, first and highest above all else. Maranatha.